Hello, hello. Y'all, I have already heard from 3 podcast listeners between recording last week's episode and recording this one today that the episode really, really resonated with them, was causing them to think about things in ways they never have before. So I'm so very touched to be getting some feedback from all of you and to be hearing that last week's episode was landing. I'm hoping that this week's episode, part 2, is going to really kind of broaden the way we're talking about this. As you can tell from the title episode, the stuff I'm going to talk about in this second part, I think will apply even to those of you that do not potentially have undiagnosed ADHD, in understanding the role that knowing yourself and perhaps even the role of diagnosis for those of us that actually can be diagnosed with something. I'm thinking of people I know that have, OCD, or even thinking in the realm of CPTSD, right? The role that that plays and how it can be very broadly thought about over your entire life. And I think this is a very important thing to be talking about right now, right? The power of self-knowing, the power of language, using words, titles, diagnoses to understand ourselves better. Because, y'all, I have been seeing lately, especially on Substack and on Instagram, a growing trend of articles and people saying we're using too much, quote, therapy speak and overdiagnosing people. And as you guys know, if you listen to the episode that I put out 3 or 4 weeks ago, I did an episode called Stop the Narcissist Hunt, where I went into how nuanced I think this is. And I did go into more detail about how I do agree with some of that. But I think this is, once again, we see this in us as humans. The pendulum swings one way and then it goes to overcorrect and it goes the other way. And so we've seen the pendulum, going further in this direction in the last 10, 20 years of people really understanding more, going to therapy, learning the language around the patterns and the behaviors they're seeing in their childhood, in their marriage, in themselves. So the pendulum swung that way. And what I'm seeing is we're starting to kind of swing back the other way, where now it's, people being like, oh, we're overdiagnosing. And especially in my realm, in my work, with those of you considering divorce, I want to say my voice is going to stay pretty solidly grounded in what I have seen, which is that it can be absolutely life-changing and immeasurably important and life-affirming in ways that I can't even really convey with my words, to understand and identify things in your life with words such as narcissism or codependency, to be able to understand attachment styles and talk about those, CPTSD, and for me now, ADHD. Contrary to these new voices in these articles saying, oh, this is leading us to be less understanding of others and to be more divisive. That has not been my personal experience, nor is it the experience that I've seen in the women that I work with. And I think that's because of the way I come to those diagnoses. Those diagnoses for me, which obviously not all of those can be diagnosed, right? I was never diagnosed with codependency. I was never diagnosed with CPTSD. ADHD is the only thing I've been able to be diagnosed with. But using those terms that I know a lot of people would consider CPTSD and narcissism and codependency to be, quote, therapy speak, for me, they have brought me into much deeper self-understanding and self-compassion. And from that space, that has rippled out into being able to understand others and through, understanding them, be able to see them with more compassion. Thus, I still think that when used supportively, diagnosis and therapy speak and therapy language can be life-changing because they help us take these patterns that are already unfolding. We are in the middle of them. We are being driven by them. We are unconsciously repeating them like right now in our lives. They take those and they allow us to wrap our mind around them and make sense of them. When I look back at my life, I genuinely can look at these like core flashpoints in my journey, and they are usually linked to having language around an experience that prior to that moment was very confusing. So I really believe that if I had not had the word narcissism way back when in 2017, when I was working with my therapist, and reading up on that and understanding more of those patterns and having the language and the words to describe the behaviors and the patterns I was seeing with more narcissistically inclined individuals in my life, I don't think I would have been able to set the boundaries that I needed or really start individuating and delineating myself from them. I look back and I remember during my dating years when before I understood attachment styles, before I understood anxious versus avoidant attachment styles, I was dating a lot of partners that I now recognize were avoidant and were activating that anxious attachment for me. And we were just going around and around and around. Once I learned those labels, and, contrary to me being like, ooh, you're an avoidant, you're evil, it was just like, oh, you have these characteristics, and that's actually just not a fit for the way my nervous system works. CPTSD was the same thing for me. 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, when I learned about CPTSD and the idea of emotional flashback management, whoa, just another huge transformative experience for my life of going, okay, that's what's happening there. That's why I all of a sudden feel like a little kid in my body. There's nothing wrong with me. I can actually understand it. I can see it coming, and I can have tools now that help me manage that. It also revolutionized who I was willing to date at that time, because it was like, oh, okay, for me, it was kind of like a self-diagnosis of I feel deeply like I have CPTSD. And if I do, then it is a lot of work for me regulating my nervous system and supporting me. And I'm not going to just fuck around with that by dating anybody and everybody who's interested in me. And then finally, so y'all can see, right? Like, it's been huge for me in my personal journey. And I'm not even going into all the moments where I've seen how same when my clients understand and are able to put language to the patterns they're seeing in their childhood, in their lives, in their marriage, how life-changing that is for them. But even now, my most recent one, like with my ADHD diagnosis, that has opened up for me now a whole other realm of language and books and resources explaining with words what has felt like the black box for me for such a long time. It has opened up the door to being able to have medication, to have, my therapist was just mentioning the other day that one of the women in her office is a therapist that works specifically with women who have ADHD. And I was like, yeah, that would probably be really, really great for me. And I really wanted to start off this episode driving that kind of home for all of my listeners, especially as I said, I'm seeing this new wave coming in of this kind of like, oh, we're overdoing it, when the results that I've seen, the impact it can make are massive when it's used supportively. And in the way I use it, the way I use it with my clients, the way I've used it in my life, it has been not only supportive, but life-changing using those terms, because I've really seen how when we can't understand what is in front of us, it is so much harder to accurately support or change what is going to actually make the difference. And in thinking about all of this, I came up with this example that I hope will illustrate for y'all what I mean by this. So recently in the last month, I all of a sudden, that's how it felt to me. All of a sudden, I was having so much back pain. I mean, back pain that was all day long. I would say in pain all day, going to bed in pain. Like by the end of the day, I would lay down and I would be in so much pain. And then as I'm laying in bed, I wouldn't be able to get comfortable. I would like lay on my back and I'd be in pain. I'd lay on my side, I'd be in pain. I'd lay on the other side, I'd be in pain. I'd use pillows in between my legs, pillows around my body. Like no matter what position I was in, I was in pain. I would wake up in pain. I had pulled a couple muscles about 2 months ago. So I was like, okay, maybe that's the problem. I go see a chiropractor every week. So I'm talking to my chiropractor. I'm like, I am in so much pain. I don't know what's happening. She's checking out my body and she's like, I'm not feeling like this is structural. Maybe you need to go talk to somebody about cranial sacral. We're bringing up like, maybe I'm processing a bunch of trauma. Like what is happening in my body? I'm rethinking with my personal trainer. I'm like, okay, maybe I have just built all the muscles on like the outside and I need to work more on the core. I would have nights where I'd go to bed crying, y'all. Like I would cry, have Joe hold me in bed crying because I was in so much pain and I just couldn't get comfortable. And then y'all, this past week, literally this last week, all of a sudden I'm like, wait a second. Joe and I switched chairs about a month ago, and maybe it's just the fucking chair. And we switched back, and y'all, lo and behold, the back pain is like 75% better. And I just have to say, I think that is another example of like the ADHD for me for sure is not being able to remember like, oh, we just changed chairs like a month ago. I've had back pain ever since I fell down a flight of stairs right after having my second son. And so I'd been mentioning it to Joe. He was looking at the chair. He's like, I don't think it's really built for you. So we switched chairs and here we were switching it, hoping that it would make things better. And actually it made things a lot worse. And so just so ADHD that in switching the chairs a month later, here I am thinking about all the other things it could possibly be and forgetting, wait a second, we just switched chairs. So I think this example is like perfect for driving home the importance of what I hope this second episode does, which is illuminating how taking the time to really find the root of the symptoms allows us to use our energy, our time, our resources so much more effectively. And how that applies, not just in my journey with ADHD is this is why I am so passionate about the process you are in right now with considering divorce. Because I think that is a very special, like incredible period of time where you get to learn as much as you possibly can about the roots of the symptoms that you are seeing in your marriage, where you can gain incredible knowledge that hopefully in this period of time, in learning that knowledge and learning about yourself and learning about your marriage, either, as I've said before, that knowledge allows you and your partner to create something new, something different, or you understand what wasn't working, you move forward with divorce, and you don't repeat those problems again in the future. And another big piece of all of this, it's like the macrocosms, the different layers, right? There's the layer of the world we live in, and then there's the coming back down, there's like into our family, and then there's down into our marriage, and then there's the relationship with ourselves. And I see for so many women that are in this process, considering divorce, there is so much going on in the work that you are understanding around you and your partner, the marriage, that is going to directly relate down into how you see yourself, into the relationship with yourself. And I actually just coached a woman in my community this last week on one of our coaching calls. And she said, a part of her is afraid that the meanness, and I'm putting that in air quotes, the meanness of me will still be there even if I get divorced. And I really wanted to get to talk about this a little bit and highlight this here in this episode, because as I was coaching her, I was like, yes, my love, that will absolutely still be there once you get divorced. And what I mean by that is, especially, I don't know if this is specifically for someone, neurodivergent like me. She actually was one of the women who was like, I think the ADHD thing might be clicking. But many of us have a deep fear that there is something wrong with us, especially if your marriage is not working. If you are in the process of considering divorce, I would bet good money that part of you has asked yourself the question, like, is it me? Am I the problem? The title of this episode, right? Am I the one that is hard to love? We are deeply afraid that even if we leave this situation, we will take the problems with us and we will never really find what we're looking for. And y'all, as you know, from part 1 of this 2-part series, that's where I was this last year, right? Having kind of gone a little bit like full circle and finding myself once again with this painful dread coming up and this confusion and overwhelm and pain around the quote, meanness, who I am, what it's like to live and be me. But now, 6 years after getting divorced, and with many of the things I've most wanted to achieve and experience in my life actually being here, like I knew when she said, I'm scared the meanest will still be there. I was like, yeah, I know how dark and scary it can be to fear deep down that the marriage is not going to be the real problem. That when you leave, you will still find yourself seeking an answer. And ultimately, that answer will end up being you. And you can hear in the way we talk about this and we think about this, it's such a negative way to see ourselves. Our brains are kind of trained to do this, to look for like, where is the problem? How do we fix the problem? And especially if you happen to have undiagnosed ADHD, if you are neurodivergent, you definitely got messages from your teachers, your parents, perhaps your spouse in marriage that you are confusing or difficult to love or difficult to handle. And even if you don't have that, I think that's like extra and above. Even just as a woman in a patriarchal world, in the systems and the culture that we are raised in, if you don't fit the gender stereotypical ideas of what women are, which if you happen to be more of a wild woman type, women who run with the wolves, you are not going to fit that. You may have from a very, very young age internalized this idea that it is difficult to love me. I need to behave. I need to be different. I need to hold it all together for everybody else. And that is so, talk about the real root, like down, down, down underneath the layers of our childhood, of our marriage, of what we're seeing right now in how we're showing up in our work or as a mother or as a partner. Down at the very root of all of it, more and more I'm seeing and acknowledging in myself and also seeing in the women in my community, in my one-on-one clients, that, and this is just my belief, but I believe that the deepest journey in adulthood is coming to love and understand yourself. More and more when I think of like what I want on my deathbed, what are the things I want to have experienced? What are the goals I want to have? I'm realizing like all of the old goals that I used to have are fading, and kind of what's coming to the forefront most of all is that I really want to deeply understand what I am, the creature that I am, how I think, how I move, how I feel, and not only to understand that, but to love that. To no matter what other people, think of me, no matter how much they don't understand how my brain works, how I think, how I feel, or what my lived experience is, for me to understand it. And what I've seen is in me understanding it and loving it more, I am now intentionally choosing people that naturally love and get that to be in my inner circle as well. And as you guys have seen, that is leading me more and more to the life that I live now. A life that feels much more grounded, much more deep, much more soulful. The words that are coming to mind is like there's marrow in the bones in the life that I'm living now because I am the bones. And what flows out of that is, it's such a symbiotic. It's like as we go deeper, as we go down into the underworld of ourself and these deep understanding ourselves and loving ourselves, that has a dramatic and direct impact on what we can do on the top side, right? I trust myself more than I've ever trusted myself at any other period in my life. And because I'm showing up more and more as the me that is me without all of the pretending and masking and being someone else, the people who really like and love me just the way I am can now find me because I'm visible. I'm not hiding all the time. So that was a really beautiful, long intro to what this this episode is going to be of this 2-part series. It's about this core of really, I think, the journey that all of you are drawn to. That's why you're drawn to me. Yes, it's through the lens of considering divorce, but the journey at the heart of all of this is coming to really understand and love and trust yourself. And from that space, then you know what the decisions are that you're going to make when it comes to your divorce, what the decisions are that you're going to make when it comes to your purpose in life, your work, your passion, how you want to show up in the world. So I'm very excited through a few different areas, to dive into these other parts that I'm hoping will kind of illuminate your journey even further through me sharing it, specifically through the lens of my ADHD. But like I said, you don't have to be diagnosed with ADHD for this to still apply the things that I'm going to be talking about in this episode. So I want to give you guys a roadmap for the episode. It's kind of going to be in 2 big sections with a little fun medication chit chat in the middle. So the first half of the episode, I'm going to dive in with you to the connections I've started making to where ADHD shows up in my past, in my present, and where it would have, I think, definitely shown up in my future, especially if it was undiagnosed. And like I said, even if you don't have ADHD, the way I'm going to be talking about this, I still believe it will help you notice and see where perhaps in your own life, undiagnosed neurodivergence or mental health may have played a part in your childhood, may be affecting your marriage or your relationships with friends or your children right now, and can ultimately limit what is possible for you in your future. After that, we're going to have that juicy middle section, which is where I'm going to spend a little portion of time talking more in depth about medication. And I felt this was really important to just get this on record because this is new territory for me, y'all. And, based off of the part 1 episode, I am experiencing a lot of amazing results with medication. And so I want to be very transparent about what I'm learning around it for myself, what I'm hearing from others, and ultimately drive home that is a very, very personal decision. And when I was thinking about, what would I have loved someone to have shared with me before I tried out, with getting my ADHD diagnosis, or even, the medication I'm on doesn't require an ADHD diagnosis. So even just trying that, knowing the symptoms I had and what I was struggling with, What would I wanted someone to give me a peek into? That's what I'm going to talk about, is a little bit more of the process and what to kind of be aware of if you have not tried that and you're considering it. And then finally, y'all, I will finish off this episode, this gorgeous 2-part series by getting to share why, for me personally, I think getting this diagnosis has been so empowering. And I think that can be very helpful for anybody who receives a diagnosis. I think of women I know that have been diagnosed with OCD. The diagnosis, I'm going to talk about how that is the circumstance, and the thoughts that we choose about it, I think, are what really make the difference. And I also want to share with you 10 traits that I now realize are my, quote, superpowers that come from my ADHD. I've given you guys, in part 1, a lot of the challenges that are found in ADHD. I'd love to now share the things about me that I am realizing are coming from ADHD, most likely. And I think that's super important, especially if you are one of my girlies that is like, ooh, I think this might be me. I may be one of your listeners that has undiagnosed ADHD. I want you to see both sides of the coin. Okay, with that roadmap laid out for us all, let's now dive in. So, in thinking about the impact that I believe ADHD played in my childhood, I definitely more and more, now that I see, what ADHD looks like in women, it's become pretty glaring to me that this is what my mother was struggling with. And interestingly enough, I actually coached another woman in my community this week, and she said a very similar thing. After listening to part 1 of my episode, she was like, oh my gosh, if she ends up having it, she's like, I'm pretty sure this is what I'm seeing in my mother. It just makes what I've seen in my mom make so much more sense. And as you guys know, those of you that have listened to the podcast, been with me from the beginning, I've had a very complicated and very, very painful relationship with my mother. One that over the last 8 years of this journey of self-discovery and coming to know myself and really change, like completely overhaul my life and my relationships, one that at times, has just felt really, really difficult. And with this new understanding of ADHD, I have been touched to see that it is bringing in a lot more compassion for me around my mother and what she may have been going through. It has allowed me a much more of, oh, wow, if she felt the way I have felt inside my body, living with undiagnosed ADHD, a little bit of that feeling of like, oh, I feel for her. Like, I have struggled enough with the incredible amount of resources that I have diligently pursued, sought out, really worked hard to try and figure out and support myself. And she had really none of that. So I want to talk about some of those characteristics that I saw in her. I think it's really important for us to, in looking back at our childhood, at our parents, when we understand things like attachment styles, CBTSD, narcissistic or codependent ways of behaving, it can help us understand why our parents showed up or didn't show up for us in the ways that they did. So with my mom specifically, I know I mentioned in part 1, emotional overwhelm being a piece of ADHD that's seen in women. And this was huge with my mother. I would say top of the list would be this. My mom was very dysregulated emotionally, high highs, super low lows. She never, as far as I know, never went to therapy, never was diagnosed with depression, never sought help for any of that. She just struggled through it. And let me emphasize, it was a struggle. Looking back at my journey, I definitely was, viewing my mom so much through the lens of what it was like to be her daughter and how painful that was. Now, looking at her from the perspective of like perhaps